Welcome to the Newtown Big Dreams podcast, an interview-style talk show that's your gateway to the fabulous and fascinating people who relocated to start a new life. Whether you're new to our podcast or your city, our fellow neighbors from across Canada, North America, and the entire English-speaking world share their stories of reaching new horizons and big dreams. So sit back and relax as we navigate in-depth and intimate conversations with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, executives, creatives, and anyone who can share their story about their Newtown big dreams. And now, here's your host, Luke J. Menkes.
So, Daniil, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to meet you. And you've got some fascinating things to talk about, psychedelics and how they can be used for mental health treatments. And I'm interested in both. As a younger person, a lot of people don't know this about me because I'm kind of a serious businessman.
Right.
But I experimented with psychedelics when I was younger. And I'm also very interested in mental health because I am close to many people that, I think everybody has someone in their family or in their close circle, if not themselves personally, that has mental health issues. And so I think it's really fascinating that we can combine these two topics. I'm really curious to know what you've learned about this. Yeah. So you're pretty new to Kelowna, is that right?
Yes.
Tell us the story of how you got to Kelowna.
So I got to Kelowna because I applied to I was applying to universities, and one of the universities I applied to was UBC. And my first choice was actually Vancouver, and then my second choice was Okanagan. But I didn't get into Vancouver. I ended up going to Okanagan. And at first I kind of thought it wasn't the best option, but now looking back, I feel like that's kind of the best thing that could have happened to me. Like, Kelowna is a super beautiful place, and the summers are amazing. Like, I used to come here intermittently on vacation when I was younger, when I moved, because I'm from Calgary. So from Calgary, I would come out to Kelowna like every summer. But this was my first winter in Kelowna, which was quite brutal.
Yeah, it was one of the worst we've had.
Yeah, so
I've been here 7.5 years, and that was the worst so far.
Yeah, okay, well, that's what everyone says, so hopefully it'll be better next year. And yeah, so I came to this school, and it's a beautiful place, and a lot of very smart people at UBC Okanagan, which are doing a lot of interesting research in psychedelics as well.
Interesting. So you grew up in Calgary.
Yes.
And you're from Ukraine.
Yes.
Initially. And you said you were 2 years old when your family moved here. Why did they decide to come to Canada when you were 2 years old?
So when I was 2, I immigrated to Canada. It wasn't necessarily my parents. It was my grandparents because at the time they had like a way to immigrate through academics. So if you had a certain level of education, it was quite simple. And it was like a point system. So if you have like a master's or a PhD, you get a certain amount of points. If you did this and this, so you accumulate those points, and then they decide whether you want to immigrate. So Ukraine had quite a difficult situation always.
Just to put it into context, what year are we talking?
We're talking 2002.
2002.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah.
So you are 19?
Yes.
That's it?
Yes. Wow. Yeah.
Awesome.
So politically, Ukraine is very unstable. There's a lot of corruption, right? You can't move through the ranks in corporations or in government as easily as in Canada, for example, where in Canada, I truly believe we have like equal opportunity, right, to do whatever you want to do. But in Ukraine, there is legitimately a ceiling of where you can go based off of who's your parents and so on.
Yeah.
So,
It's just you and me.
Sorry. My phone's been acting up. Is your phone like just waking up random times?
I don't know. Siri just turned on randomly.
Yeah.
There.
Mine for the last week has been doing that. So hopefully you don't have this ghost or whatever is going on.
They're monitoring us.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and in order to create the best opportunity for their children and my parents, for me, they decided to immigrate. And at first, like, there was a lot of resistance. Like, my grandma didn't want to go almost till the very last minute, but my grandfather was like, we should go. It's the best opportunity. And ultimately, there was actually two decisions, because we could also have immigrated to Argentina. But they ended up picking Canada. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
So you obviously learned English as a child. Did your parents and grandparents already know English, or was that something they had to deal with when that decision was made?
That is something they had to deal with. They did not know English at all. It was only Russian and Ukrainian. My parents kind of took a little bit of English in like elementary and like high school. It was kind of like an option course. But yeah, it was something that they had to learn, and myself as well. Even furthermore, like, my first schooling was in French, not even English. So I only had like Russian and French until the third grade, and then I learned English around the third grade.
I see. Interesting. And do you know why they chose Calgary?
So the opportunities were Calgary or Toronto, really.
Okay.
The choice of Calgary was because they're very like mountain people. They love, at a time in Ukraine, like, vacations weren't really possible for people who were poor. So what would necessarily happen is people would do other activities like hiking in the mountains, rafting, and so forth. So they had friends in Calgary who were like, look, the mountains are literally right here, amazing rivers, like some of the best skiing in the world. And then they also had friends in Toronto that were like, the job market here is terrible. All you can do is work like as a janitor and stuff. So like they kind of had like these two perspectives, and they're like, Calgary seems like the better one. Naturally
very beautiful. In Calgary are very close by anyways. The mountains are very close. And
yeah.
It is beautiful in that sense, for sure. So I just want to ask you a couple more questions about Ukraine, because I do have it in my distant background. So we're, I think, 6th or 7th generation Canadians.
Okay.
But on my dad's side, we have some Ukrainian.
Yeah.
But I don't know much about it. You know, I'm a student of world history. And is Ukrainian different from Russian when it comes to language?
Yes, it is. Like, for example, I never learned Ukrainian, but I speak Russian as my first language.
Okay.
But I can understand many Ukrainian phrases, so it's a little bit different. But like the alphabet is a little bit different, and certain words and pronunciation is different. I'm obviously not an expert in dialect, so I can't say exactly how similar they are, but it's similar. It's not something like English and French where they're very different, because French has all these different like pronouns, like him, her, his, their, right?
Very different.
So in that sense, actually, Russian and Ukrainian are very similar to French, because they have like the same structure of the language.
Interesting.
English is a bit different.
And so you learned Russian. How come you learned Russian instead of Ukrainian?
That's just the thing about, like, they were indoctrinating the youth in Ukraine then. They really wanted to shift away from like Ukrainian values, strip away like Ukrainian language. Like it wasn't a good place to be in. That's why we left.
I see. Yeah. And have you been back since?
Yes. So I've been coming back, like, as I said, intermittently. Last time I was there was about when I was 12. I haven't been back since then, because when I reached the age of 16, they began calling my home there, where my grandma is, and asking where is Daniil, because they were looking for somebody to take it into the military, because they know that somebody who's 16 is supposed to be living here.
Yeah.
And so if I would go back, I would have to do mandatory military service. And because the military, I would say, is understaffed, under-equipped, under-trained, they kind of just send you into conflict, and many young people like have died in what's going on right now in the conflict with Russia and Ukraine. So I don't think it's a good place for me to be, and that's why I probably won't be coming back for a while.
Yeah, that makes sense. Totally makes sense. So how did you get into psychedelics? First of all, let me ask you, are you still at UBC
Yes.
And what's your major?
So basically in UBC, when you get enrolled into sciences as general, if you select science.
It is a science school, predominantly.
Yeah.
Do they have a law school or any liberal arts, or is it?
So originally, actually, from what I heard, is that the purpose of UBC Okanagan was to create a concentrated, like, liberal arts school. Sort of how, University of Pennsylvania, they have, like, different campuses. And they have a small concentrated campus of about like 6,000 kids, and they wanted to elevate it to like the best possible liberal arts school.
UBCO.
Well, and that's what I think UBCO tried to do. They tried to
model after University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, but what happened was they decided to go where the money is, which is engineering and sciences. They built a new engineering building and everything, and so now the majority of the people are enrolled in sciences. I think it's like 6,000 kids in sciences and like 2,000 kids in engineering. So it kind of deviated from its original purpose, and now I guess it is more like a sciences and engineering school.
Do they still have a liberal arts program?
Yeah, and I think it's quite good. I've taken several courses with a lot of professors who worked abroad, for example, for political science. And we had a lot of really cool people coming in to speak. For example, do you know the MP Ron Cannon?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so
he's been on the show.
Oh, really?
And wonderful man.
Okay, yeah. So he came in and he gave a little talk about politics and how he became MP and stuff. And
nice.
So that was super cool. So the liberal arts aspect is definitely still there.
That's good to hear. I know in the United States there's a big thing right now that a lot of people feel that the liberal arts programs in the majority of schools is very left-leaning. And a lot of people are pissed off about this. Yeah. I know Ron is a conservative. And, it's nice to hear that someone can speak. I've heard that conservative speakers in the United States can actually face riots and very severe protests.
Yeah.
You know?
That's, yeah.
So that's interesting. I don't want to get into a political discussion, but it's kind of interesting. But, so tell us now, so your major right now is what?
Computer science, but it's still a general science, but I plan to be doing computer science, yeah.
Okay, so when you take a major, you get, the majority of your courses are in that field or related to it, but you can take other courses too.
Yeah, so basically how it works is you take the courses that you want to major in, but they make you take a general science first year. So I still have to take chemistry, physics. I could take biology, but I didn't have to. But you also have to take English, and you have to have like an arts elective. So they try to kind of make it general first year, and they still try to make it general in the upper years. But then you can only concentrate on your major after the first year. Yeah, which is a little bit different than other schools. Like I know University of Victoria. If you wanted to do computer science, you go straight into computer science. Like you don't bother with other stuff. And
when it comes to liberal arts courses, which ones are you taking? Which ones do you like?
So I'm a huge fan of political science. Cool. I definitely read a lot about that. Those were the electives that I've taken. I've also taken English. And in the summer, I'll be taking sociology and economics. I don't know if you want to. Yeah. Is economics like liberal arts?
Yeah. I think it's kind of on the border between sociology and mathematics. Right. Because you need to know math to understand economics, but there's a lot of psychology in it, too. I love economics. So when I was in university, my major was a double major, political science and philosophy. And I had economics classes. I loved English. I liked too many things. It was really hard for me to focus. I thought I was going to become a lawyer and decided against it. But that's why I was taking philosophy and political science, because political science to put things into context, and philosophy to know how to argue, to make an argument, right? And think in logic. But I love the law, and I still read about the law, but I had a vision of myself wearing a suit and tie, being stuck in an office downtown Toronto on Friday night, and it horrified me. And I think within a week I dropped out and I got a real estate license instead.
Okay.
But I'm fascinated by all those topics. But if you're studying computer science, where is the connection to psychedelics?
So psychedelics is just something that like has been brought up to me when I was kind of younger by like my friends. I'm in a group of friends that definitely love to read a lot. One of my closest friends loves reading everything, and he kind of introduced me to the topic before university. He started talking about how like, look how these substances can help with like addiction, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder better than previous methods which we have known before. And I was kind of like opened my mind to get into it and start reading a lot of the research. And now that I'm at UBC, I get access to all of that research for free. So because they pay like all the membership and licensing, in fact, they spend around like $26 million a year just for students to have access to all this information. So, and I think it's a great tool. And like as soon as I came to university, I started reading as much as I could about it. And it kind of also got into the idea of like functional medicine versus like conventional medicine for me, which I was kind of hearing about even earlier, where like we have a medical system that tries to help with like only symptoms, right?
That's right.
That's the conventional medicine. But like the functional medicine is where they're trying to find the underlying cause of what the issue is. And they're trying to actually fix what's making you have like that anxiety or depression.
Interesting. Was there something in your past or someone you're close to that got you interested in that topic specifically?
Mostly just my friends. My parents are quite, I would say, like, not necessarily conservative, but like, I would say that they were very resistant to drugs, let's say, especially psychedelics. Like, when I told my mom that I'd be talking about psychedelics, she kind of had that like, oh, whoa, like
a little
this,
bit shocking.
Yeah, like this kind of, you could tell that there's like a stigma. She's like, are those the people that are like on the streets, like,
yeah,
like not
yelling at the clouds? And
yeah. Like I'm like, not necessarily. Like if it's in a controlled environment, like with controlled dosages and so on, like it could provide a lot of positives. So there's definitely that stigma that's around them.
Definitely a stigma. And but you don't have to answer this if you don't want. But was there someone, yourself or someone you're close to, that was searching for a solution to a mental issue that kind of attracted to you? Or was it just general knowledge? Like, I love politics and I love political science. Nobody in my family was political, really. My dad was kind of sort of interested in it, but he was a businessman, But for whatever reason, I just love that topic. But a lot of times you find people are into a topic because, someone they know was suffering, or they themselves, had this burning question for some reason.
Yeah. So not necessarily. Like, I was just mostly introduced to it because of like my friend, really. And just the fact that like I've always had this kind of feeling that there should be less government intervention, and that there's always something that's kind of like, I don't know, something that's weird about it. So every time that there's like a little bit of evidence that like shows that to me, that like, oh look, like the way we're treating a lot of these illnesses is wrong, and the way that we could be treating them better is banned. Like, why is that? Yeah. So kind of like, and that just kind of kept me rolling on it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what have you learned? Tell us about psychedelics. Like, how does it help people?
So it could definitely help people with many things, from addiction, depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. I think we should start with a history on psychedelics from kind of like where they started. So there was like great promise in the 1900s for these substances. There were many research, especially there was like a huge hub in Saskatchewan, which is quite interesting, for LSD research.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. And in fact, the term psychedelics, which was coined by Humphrey Osmond, he worked in Saskatchewan at some point with LSD, helping people who are struggling with alcoholism. And one such study I have here was by Colin Smith in 1958, and they found that 66% of alcohol users quit after the LSD and mescaline-assisted therapy.
So fascinating. Do you know how LSD was discovered?
Yes. So it was discovered by Albert Hofmann in 1938. But the pharmaceutical company was known as Sandoz in Switzerland, and they were looking how to mimic how these there's natural psychedelics like ayahuasca, psilocybin, peyote.
Mushrooms.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that is psilocybin. So that's
psilocybin. Okay.
So psilocybin mushrooms. That's also known as mushrooms or shrooms or whatever you have to want to call it. And they were trying to figure out, because we have these systems in our brains with serotonin receptors and adrenaline, and they wanted to find substances which could mimic these responses in our brain that these natural substances can do and that we can do naturally. Mm-hmm. So, and in the process, Albert Hofmann in 1938 synthesized LSD.
So what is LSD now, for people who don't understand? So it's a synthetic chemical compound.
Exactly.
And it's trying to mimic what?
So it was originally trying to mimic serotonin, but also the natural psychedelic substances. Okay. So it was a synthetic version of the natural ones.
Right. So the plant-based substances, and for people who don't know, serotonin is the chemical that gives us a sense of well-being.
Yes.
Right?
And happiness.
Happiness, basically joy. Mm-hmm. Not the same as dopamine, mm-hmm. which is more, in my understanding, dopamine is more like an excitable. It's more euphoric. It's more intense. But serotonin is more of a pleasant joy, more on the peaceful side of the spectrum.
Yes. Yeah. And so when they made it, they actually so there was a brief period of time between the 1930s and 1960s before they were banned. A lot of exciting research was happening, and LSD, Sandoz actually gave LSD out to anybody who wanted to research it around the world. And the first research was conducted in the U.S. The first research in America was by Dr. Max Rinkel and Dr. Robert Hyde. And they, even before they distributed to their volunteers that they want to test it on, they tried it themselves. And this was a common theme amongst all many psychotherapists. They would use these substances on themselves. Mm-hmm. And this is what sort of ultimately led to the banning of them in 1960, where the scientific community was saying, how can you guys have these valued, the research wasn't as well done. They believed that some of it was biased and skewed because they were taking these substances and saying how great they were, and they were trying to make the research fit their results. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the scientific methods which they used could not be replicable after the 1960s. And so a lot of the research was sort of seen as wrong. And mm-hmm. it did show great positive results, but it was ultimately seen as not correctly done. And that's kind of what's exciting right now. There's a renaissance, if you will, of these new studies which are using the proper research methods and showing how these substances can be helpful.
Very interesting. So I think you would agree that the reason for banning it is because there's powerful political and pharmaceutical interests, and they want to figure out a way to profit from the thing. I mean, the primary motive for a lot of these corporations is profit. And if they can, benefit society or something, that's kind of a secondary thing. But if someone independently is experimenting and passing out product to their friends and they're having these mental breakthroughs, it doesn't really help the pharmaceutical industry. They need to control it.
I could see that. I think it's definitely debatable of what led to the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act and banning all these substances. I think you're definitely on point, and I would agree with you. But I like to deviate away from a lot of those. I don't really focus too much on what caused them to be banned, because there's also a lot of conspiracy theories mm-hmm. about how because the time period of the Vietnam War, and so there was a huge kind of all those people who were protesting the war. They believed that they were a lot of them were much influenced by psychedelics. They were all a lot of for peace and stuff, mm-hmm. and so. There's definitely certain interesting theories of why exactly they were banned, but I kind of when I gave a talk about this, I kind of just said like, okay, they were banned. Like
that's just a fact.
Yeah.
Let's deal with what it is.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's talk a little bit about like what is the scientific basis that these things help, and tell us like what happens in the brain. Just like how does it help? So
we can separate psychedelics into like two groups. There's like they call it like the classics, which would be your LSD, mescaline, DMT, and psilocybin, and then there's like the empathogens, which are like MDMA, for example. Mm-hmm. So these classics, they what they kind of did is they help you to look at yourself from the outside. So, for example, how LSD is helping with alcoholism and what they were finding. So with guided therapy sessions, proper dosages, and like the proper setting, it allows you to kind of look at your ego from the outside, as they say, and this ultimately lets you to evaluate yourself, like whether you're addicted to tobacco or alcohol. And so for like MDMA, for example, they are supposed to like increase your empathy, mm-hmm. and which MDMA really helps with PTSD because of that, because it allows for the fear of the PTSD in their patients to like go away. Like a lot of patients, what they experience when they're talking to therapists, for example, is that they actually cannot talk about their traumatic experiences.
Because it revives the emotion.
Exactly. And so MDMA allows them to not fear it as much and talk to the therapists about their issues. And one such study was conducted by MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And phase 2 of their trials found that 61% of their volunteers no longer experienced any symptoms of PTSD following their therapeutic sessions. And after 1 year, that number increased to 68%. So 68% after 1 year didn't really experience PTSD symptoms. And they're saying that by 2021, if their studies are continuing to be showing like efficacy and so on, MDMA could be legalized as a prescription substance in the US for people struggling with PTSD.
Interesting. You mentioned that in a controlled environment, it can be very beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've seen or read about people may have what's called a bad trip.
Yes.
So maybe they've taken too much or they're in the wrong frame of mind to start. When I did LSD
mm-hmm.
A couple decades ago, I noticed that the state of mind I was in prior to the drug kicking in really had a huge impact on the experience I would have.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was feeling a little bit paranoid or nervous or anxious, that was a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
If I was feeling kind of happy and, exploratory and I want to, experiment and discover things and stuff like that, it was usually a fantastic experience. So do you know much about what is it that causes people to have a bad experience versus an enlightening and good experience?
Well, one thing is that like a lot of people say that there are no such thing as bad experiences with
mm-hmm.
these substances, is that every experience is an experience and it's a learning experience.
Right.
But
it's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. So, but the thing is like, definitely you're right about like, you definitely have to be prepared for the substances. And that's one of the things that like I'm aiming to kind of keep pushing forward, is that these are not just any substances as like something that you might just like say like tobacco. You just go and light a cigarette and like you experience your nicotine rush and so on. Mm-hmm. This is like a serious substance. I personally do not do not recommend just personal usage just like of psychedelics.
It's not something you should be doing like to party.
Yeah,
for example.
Yeah, and also like it's not something that like how I like mentioned how I'd say helps with anxiety, for example. It's not something that like, oh, I get anxious around people, so I'm just gonna take some LSD or something, or like and try to like maybe that'll help, maybe it won't. But I think the thing is that it really helps with like the serious anxiety. Like you have cancer and someone tells you that you're going to die in a week. Like what do you do with that information? Like that's that's a heavy thing to say to someone, right? And so it's in those cases, like the serious cases, where it could really help. And,
I see.
Yeah.
So is it, should it be done under supervision in all cases?
Definitely. I think that in all cases, there should be the right setting, the right dosage that's monitored, and there should be someone who's monitoring the patient. And I think you can expand this idea into, say, for example, like in the future, say if people do want to take it to party, for instance. Like, and we already see this popping up, like these booths at many music festivals, for example, which test your substances, so that make sure that your substances are absolutely pure. Make sure that they monitor. So like if someone is like passing out, like, or having something terrible, they can be there to assist that person, right? Yeah. Because at the end of the day, right, you're not going to be able to, I think you shouldn't, and you're not going to be able to stop people from doing drugs, any drug really. Right. And like once you reach the age of majority in, like, for example, BC, that's 19, right? It's assumed that you have the responsibility to choose like how you act, and you have responsibility for those actions, right? That's why we get to drive a car, take out like a mortgage, for example. Like there's these risks. Same thing for drinking alcohol, and tobacco. So, and I think these substances are really no different.
Yeah. So they're very powerful. I like to compare a lot of things to driving. Driving is something that people do. They need to do it. They want to do it. It's not something you're going to prevent, but people need to be basically educated about the risks, dangers. I mean, you've got a 3-ton piece of steel, right, that can kill people, including yourself. Basic education and a little bit of regulation, would you say? So, like, doses need to be measured correctly, controlled.
Well, yeah, that's definitely part of the, like, so say, I think it would be better to have these substances not prohibited, because what you do have is you have adolescents or whoever, say, trying to get LSD, right? And they get it from a source that they might not really know about. They also might not be very educated on the topic, and they might not know that you need to test your substance, because LSD is not very toxic itself. You can take quite a lot of it. You won't experience any physical damage. You might have some mental damage after if you take huge amounts, right? But physically, not really much will happen. But by having these substances legal, right, so they'll ensure that the substances are pure, and that what you're getting is in fact what you're getting. Because, like, again, like I said, people are going to do these substances really either way.
Yeah. And you know the dose that you're getting.
Exactly.
I remember smoking a lot of marijuana as a teenager and young adult. And the biggest problem with that was that you could never tell, like, what dose you were getting. You know, how strong it was.
Okay.
And with alcohol, like, it's got to be clearly labeled on the bottle, like, this is 40%, this is 5%. You know what I mean? So we can make judgments like, okay, if I drink this much, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah. And I think we're definitely seeing that with marijuana now with the legalization, right?
Yeah.
If you go to the dispensary or the store, it's going to tell you exactly the percentages, how much THC, how much CBD, right? So you're going to know what you're taking. So. Yeah.
Now, we know with alcohol, possibly more than any other substance, maybe tobacco is similar, but for a lot of humans, I wouldn't say the majority, but a lot of people, it's really hard to control the intake. There's some people that it's believed they shouldn't touch alcohol. They shouldn't go close to it.
Yeah.
Because they say, well, just have a drink. And where most of us could say, well, I'm going to have one drink, and we stick to that. There are people that they say, I'm going to have one drink, and then something switches in the brain, and they will not stop. They cannot stop. They will justify. They will argue with their friends. You know, something switches. Even if before they had the first drink, they will say, no, I know one drink is all I can handle. I'm going to do that. But something switches. Do you think with psychedelics there is something similar?
Well, I think so with most psychedelics, so LSD, ayahuasca, psilocybin, they're actually not addictive. So if you take a look at a lot of the areas that help with the addiction clinics,
Mm-hmm.
they never really have cases where people are like, I'm addicted to LSD or psilocybin. Or,
I can't stop.
Yeah, that's really not something that occurs. So that's one of the arguments that I make of why these substances are actually quite better, and because we can see that. So I have some facts here that I brought in.
Mm-hmm.
That alcoholism and nicotine addiction are epidemic scale issues. So tobacco use worldwide causes about 6 million deaths per year. And from 2015 to 2016, a study by the Canadian Institute of Health Information reported that there were 77,000 hospitalizations from 2015 to 2016 with alcohol. And alcohol is also quite deadly, right? In toxicity. If you could drink enough to have liver failure, for example.
This is true. I think my understanding of alcohol abuse is most deaths occur from accident, right? Because you lose your judgment. I like to give the story of when I was younger and smoking a lot of marijuana. I never tried to demand my car keys from someone. I was really high with marijuana. You know, I knew I was high. I did not want to go outside. I didn't want to. But alcohol is different. You know, people will argue with you and say, no, I'm totally fine.
Yeah.
And it's very strange that the drunker people get, the worse their judgment gets. And marijuana is kind of the opposite. Like, people tend to get a little bit paranoid.
Yeah.
But I've never seen somebody really, really high saying, you know what, I'm totally fine to drive. I want to go drive. Like, they get a little bit nervous and pull back. Whereas alcohol kind of makes people really stupid.
Yeah, and that's definitely like the arguments for psychedelics. Like, and you were talking a little bit about like the behavior aspect, right? And that's why it's important with psychedelics that it's monitored, because there's we could look at substances as a whole through toxicity, behavior, and dependency, right? And we can obviously see that alcohol, nicotine has dependency. It's also toxic. But for psychedelics, not very toxic, not much dependency, but like, as you mentioned, behavior, which on psychedelics, you could have some behavior, which, for example, suicides, like that has occurred. It's also part of the reasons why there was such a huge stigmatization when people would like commit suicide while on these substances. And that's why it's important to monitor the behavior of people under these substances.
Yeah. Is it far-fetched to say suicides aren't only because someone feels really depressed, but they start to hallucinate like they can fly? Things like that, like, hey, you know, it wouldn't be such a bad thing if I jump off this building. Type of thing. And it's not like, oh, I want to die, I'm so sad, but just their brain isn't computing physics and gravity correctly.
That's definitely fair to say, and that's why people who take these substances should be monitored. And that's why, in a medical sense, like, they don't say, okay, so you're struggling with alcoholism, we're going to give you LSD, go home and take it whenever you like. Like, you go there to a place, there is a psychotherapist there who is going to lead you through the experience. You're in a very like calm setting, and they make sure that you're safe when you're taking these substances.
Right. No bridges or cliffs close by.
Yeah.
So are there services in Kelowna where people can go for this kind of treatment? Or is it totally underground still? So
it's not totally underground. You could definitely type in, for example, I know for MDMA, if you go to maps.org, you could definitely see their studies on PTSD, and there's an application for if you want to take part in their study. Interesting. I know Vancouver is also doing studies with LSD and psilocybin for like anxiety with terminal illness. So you have to go through a process. You can't just show up and say, let's do something. Yeah, it's definitely in the research phase. And so that's kind of the thing. That's why I'm here talking about it, to raise awareness sort of, and get people sort of talking about it, thinking about it, and reading about it. That's the biggest thing. Like, the information is out there, and all you have to really do is read about it. Some of the benefits you mentioned seem comparable to what people say about the benefits of meditation.
being able to disassociate from your pain, your depression, kind of view your own self objectively, kind of step outside yourself. Is it similar to meditation? Do you know much about meditation? Is it similar, or what's different?
So yeah, I do know about meditation, and I know that a lot of people that take it very seriously do sometimes compare it to experiences on dosages of psychedelics. There's definitely similar effects of being able to look at yourself from the outside, but it's hard if you're not good at it, if you don't know the proper steps. Like this, like I think telling somebody who's in a lot of pain or super depressed, like you just have to meditate, and they're going to go home and sure, I'm just going to meditate, that's kind of like harder. So these substances definitely really help to achieve that, and they help to achieve that state of meditation through these substances. And that's sort of like the cool thing, when you look at the history of psychedelics, which dates back to as like early as 5,000 years, there were a lot of there were many ceremonies using these substances, right? And and as a result, they also believed that it was a sort of connection to the divine. And if you look at Aztec culture, for example, they have a lot of effigies resembling like mushrooms. So like a lot of temples in the form of mushrooms, or little rock formations that look like mushrooms. And the word for psychedelic, for psilocybin mushrooms in ancient Aztec dialect, actually translates to flesh of God. So definitely they kind of saw that as like an aspect of helping to meditate, helping to reach the divine, for example. So
very cool. So what is your goal for this? You mentioned raise awareness. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Do you see yourself leading a clinic? And how does computer science tie into all this?
So I think there's like a quote that like if you want to make God laugh, you tell him about your plans. So like it's like I don't know what's gonna be what, but like what I do have is a website called psychedelicrevolution.org. Okay. No spaces, no capital letters. As far as like my short-term goals, what I'm looking for is I want to raise awareness on the research. Unfortunately, a lot of the research that I have access to, a lot of regular people don't, because they have to pay for those memberships, subscriptions, and so on. And so I am still thinking about how to do this the proper way, but ultimately what I want to do is I want to present this research in a digestible, easy, fun way for people to kind of learn about, so they don't have to be scouring the web or paying for these memberships, and kind of have it in one place. Currently, right now, what we have is hats, which I brought in here. Psychedelic Revolution. Right. And so, yeah, here it's... Oh, cool. Yeah, so we have them for sale for like $23.99. And it's something that just like wearing it, like maybe somebody will ask you about it and you just kind of tell them like, yeah, look at all the positives that's happening. And so it's something that kind of raises awareness. And we, so how this ties into computer science is, well, like, the more knowledge I have of technology, the easier this information I can present it and make it more valuable for people.
Interesting. And perhaps you could see a path to making a good living with computer science, and you can still pursue this passion in parallel.
Definitely, yeah. I think technology is sort of the way to go. Whether people kind of like it or not, I think that the future is in technology everywhere. You know, people talk about how it's taking over many jobs, and in the next 10 years, I don't know, it's hard to see anybody in high-ranking positions without sort of a background of computer science. Yeah. So that's kind of why I'm taking it, because I think it's really important.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I got to say, it's pretty impressive as a 19-year-old, like the amount of knowledge you have. And, I was already into my 40s where I was still like, I'm fascinated by this topic, but I have no idea where it's going to go. So I think it's great. I mean, if you're persistent and pursuing the knowledge and raising awareness and learning everything you can, something great is going to come of it. Hopefully. So I want to give you kudos for what you're doing.
Thank you. So I had, I guess, sort of as like a ending note.
Mm-hmm.
In the US, suicide rates overtook the leading cause of injury-related death, which used to be car accidents, and now car accidents are second place and suicide rates are first place. And so I hope that the future of psychedelics can hopefully try to help with this issue, because we're clearly seeing that this is a rising issue, also with the opioid epidemic. And so I think there's a place for these substances in the future to help.
That's great. It's awesome. And I think, on a positive note, like part of the reason that car deaths have gone down is because car safety has improved. So if we can learn about mental health and help people with that, I think that's a great thing.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you so much, Daniil. Who would you like to nominate to come on the show?
So to nominate, there is a associate professor at UBC Okanagan, Zach Walsh, and he's in psychology, and so he's in the Kelowna area, and I nominate him to come talk about how they're helping with patients who are struggling with PTSD using cannabis.
Nice. And what do you like about Zach?
Well, he's using sort of the functional side of the medicine of how we can help with a serious illness like PTSD. And they're using cannabis, which is interesting to see where that's going to go, because people claim that it has huge positive medical benefits. Yeah, I think it does, and I think he's trying to prove that.
Yeah, I think that's a great person to talk to, especially with legalization. And there is some debate over, is it recreational? Is it medicinal? Where's the line? And but I think there are definitely great medicinal benefits, mental health benefits, and so I'm really curious to hear about his research and what he's learning and doing with that. Exactly. So thank you for that nomination, and thank you for your time today. It's been a fascinating conversation for me.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Newtown Big Dreams podcast with your host, Luke Menkes, and his authentic guests. And we love our listeners and hope you subscribe now to learn more about the amazing journeys of our incredible guests who relocated to find a new town, big dreams. And remember, make your dreams big.